All right, me. It is still kind of mid to late September, more towards late, and today, while substituting for a German class, I finished reading the first book, of the Percy Jackson Olympian series, which is Lightning Thief. This is the first time I've read this book since I was in elementary school, which is weird, right? This is not the same book that I had at that point. This was a republished edition from many years later, after the mega corporation bought the rights to it and everything. But yeah. Obviously this book is a lot of fun. I think anyone who doesn't at least have a little bit of fun with this is either lying to themselves or cannot have fun. I think it sparked in a generation of kids this love for classical things and mythology and things, which is very, very important. This, in a lot of ways, was the quote-unquote competitor to Harry Potter. It certainly wasn't nowhere near as big, as culturally relevant, but for a lot of kids that were my age, was very, very important. And you were either a Percy Jackson kid or you're a Harry Potter kid. Kind of usurped that position for my generation of Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, right? But yeah. I forgot that this is actually the book that really inspired my love and desire, and one of the things that when I work with students, things they point out is that I'm always wearing Converse, and I forgot it's because of this book. That like the camp counselor uniform is Converse with the orange shirt and jeans. Weird thing for me to take out of this book. It's also the series that was actually the first and only time that I've written fan fiction, which is weird to say. But in elementary school, I did write an AU of this, effectively involving myself and my friends at the time, which was strange and weird, but it is what it is, right? Book itself I think is really, really interesting, right? Because it connects, right, this chosen one, or this out of place character, to some real world applications, right? Which I think is very, very strong to do, especially when you're looking at 2005, so like mid 2000s, even 2010s of this awareness and issues involving ADHD and dyslexia, and the populace becoming more and more aware of these things, but then also the over medication of it, right? And Rick Riordan puts forward like, hey, no, these two things, it's actually, because of X, Y, and Z, and these are actually superpowers in a different way, right? Which is, a really, really strong thing to do, which is really nice, right? Especially when you compare to other kind of chosen one type pieces, right? Of where it's just like, oh, I'm a weird kid because I'm a weird kid, and whatever. So I think that's really, really nice. To go along with that, I think one of my biggest takeaways, and also one of the things that I think I struggle with now as an adult more than I did when I was a kid, is that it is so in terms of events, right? There is no stopping. There is no discussion. There is no evaluation. Even in the moment, these things are described so quickly and so actively, and then it just kind of drops, right? And in a way of like the character, that makes a lot of sense, right? And who Percy Jackson is, I think for children's writing and for kind of like the demographic that is really meant for, I think that's good writing. As an adult, I kind of like, you know, I read this book in, you know, a really, really short amount of time. You know, I finished it before the end of the 6th period. So, you know, taking the time that I stopped to read, so like 4 to 5 hours or something like that to read this. Which like, it's good because like it takes a short amount of time and you still feel like you're getting really invested in things. But then when you really look at it, you go, oh, a million things happened, but none of them really seemed to digest or matter, right? They just kind of went straight through. Which is, you know, has its pros and cons to it. I think, if I remember correctly, when we get to eventually when we get to the second series, in the Lost Heroes series, that becomes a lot more like, hey, we're going to describe things and then we're going to sit down, we're going to talk about it, we're going to evaluate it. And part of that's because they've gotten older, right? It's another thing which I forgot, that in the first book, Percy Jackson is like 12. And that's because I did watch the movie, and I think I watched the second movie as well, of where it is produced as if they are older, right? Which is in itself a whole different issue. Yada 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 yada. But that's that. It does have one of my favorite 2000s tropes, which is the really fun named things, right? This was a thing that happened with literature, but also with like music and things, especially within a certain demographic of music and literature, of like the names of titles and chapters just get weird, right? But they're also very, very playful, right? And that's the thing that we've gone away from in a lot of ways, right? When I was taking my poetry class, everything that people presented for the class were always untitled. And they were just like untitled number whatever. And that even now, when it comes with working with students, just the concept of titling something to them just it seems very foreign to them, or having fun with the title, right? They always just name it, you know, whatever the assignment is, or you know, blank essay, and there's just a refusal to have fun with it. And I don't know if that is a thing because of their age. I don't know if that is because of a generational thing. I don't know if it's because, you know, I do those things because I grew up in a time where that was commonplace and that was fun, and therefore I continue to adapt that. You know, I don't know what it is, but that's that. Yeah. You know, I thought, thinking back to what I vaguely remember this book being, and some of what occurs in the book, I thought for sure the ending of this book was like, Percy Jackson does end up retrieving and returning the lightning bolt, as well as the helm, and it ended up being like this thing of where like he was supposed to be granted immortality and he turns it down in favor of the gods having a claiming and having a better relationship with their children, right? That's what I vaguely remember it being. But the ending is very much just kind of abrupt, right? In terms of like, he does the quest, his mom gets returned to him, not because of his actual quest, but because of the side thing that he suddenly has to do, right? And it's like, in a way it makes sense, right? That is what what occurs, right? And I think kind of it helps set up this kind of long term of the book and the series, but also I think does genuinely reflect what would happen in the event that we had Greek and Roman gods that some of us did quests for, right? They would ask us to do something, and then our reward for it would be, well, you should be glad I'm not killing you while you're up here. And just, you know, that's kind of that. Yeah. I'm trying to think, is there anything else I want to talk about this book with? I think Annabeth as a character is very, very interesting, right? You have this person who comes from a lineage of the wisdom of war, and tactical thinking and things like that, right? Very logistical, which, you know, is important in these sorts of stories, to have that sort of mind that is more tactical, more thoughtful in terms of the way that they act. Right, that's, and so incorporating that is in a way that makes sense within the universe is really, really nice. You know, it is this character that is like, both for Luke as well as Annabeth, of like, this character that has basically only ever grown up here, doesn't have any sort of life outside of this place, and have been trained and taught in only exclusively how to be a warrior. And then they don't really ever get the chance to be, right? And, you know, Annabeth at this point is still like 14 or 12 or whatever she is. And, you know, Luke at this point is now 19, but he came to camp when he was 14. And like, I think that sort of character is always very interesting to me, because it's very reminiscent of a series that I do love in the Halo series, with its main protagonist, right? Of where, like, how do you separate what you've been trained to do from who you are, right? And for people that have been able to grow up and exist and live in a world where they get to choose a lot of different options and experience themselves before having either something thrust upon them or undertaking a massive task, right? They still have an understanding of kind of what they're doing and why they're doing it, right? Versus characters like Annabeth and Luke, which are characters that have this kind of power and authority thrust upon them at an age where they haven't quite fully accepted what it means to be them yet. And those sorts of characters always fascinate me. Yeah. I think that's it. I think that's it for Rick Riordan's The Lightning Thief.